I want to talk about the limits of artistic expression. In particular, the limits of artistic expression in gaming. Now, it's a pretty contentious topic. It's a moral issue, obviously. But in particular, like a month ago or a few weeks ago, I'm sorry, I'm not I'm not as punctual about stuff like this, but I had wanted to make the video. Like a month ago, there was a game that came out called Hatred on Steam. It was greenlit by the Steam community. And following this, there was a whole bunch of uproar, and people got really mad because of what the game was about. It's called Hatred. And so what Valve did is Valve pretty much banned the game from Steam, and then there was even more uproar, and then they brought it back. And because of this, a lot of YouTubers and a lot of people in the gaming community posted their opinion about this, and that's pretty much what I'm going to do as well. The real issue behind a game like Hatred is that, well, it's a controversial game. What it is pretty much, it's an isometric shooter. You know, it's a sort of top-down. You control a guy who goes around and shoots just random people. You know, just shoots down civilians, and there's these like cutscene execution things. You can watch the trailer to the game on YouTube. Actually, I'm not going to link it because I don't want to give it any more attention than it deserves. But there's these cutscene execution scenes where the character you control goes up to random people and brutally murders them. And you pretty much keep going and you just kill random people and then fight law enforcement every now and again, and that's it. That's essentially what the game is about. So, before we get into the meat of this opinion editorial piece, I want to point out that whenever something like this comes across in gaming, you know, any sort of controversial thing that brings about questions of the limits of artistic expression, what most people focus on is, you know, the party, the corporation that banned the thing in the first place, should it have done this? You know, the people who are saying that this thing is bad and shouldn't be there, you know, are they correct or are they wrong? But I think there's two questions. I think there's two important questions in this discussion. There's the question of, well, okay, let's just back up for a second. There's two normative statements one can make, okay? I can say that, you know, you should do X, and X can be anything. And then I could also say that, well, you should be forced to do X. Are those two statements the same? Is it the same thing to say someone should be forced to do something and then someone should do something? I don't think those statements are the same. Well, okay, those statements are not the same. You know, to anyone who's listening, those statements are obviously not the same. One statement, the former, it's a normative statement. It has the word should in it, but it's basically a statement of preference. It just says, you should do this. In other words, I would prefer that you do, you know, X. You know, I want you to do X. I think it is morally correct for you to do X. But that's it. You know, I'm not, that statement isn't loaded, you know, in any other way. It's not saying that I'm going to force you to do it. It's not saying that I'm going to hold a gun to your head and make you do it. It's not saying that, you know, you should be killed for not doing it. It's just saying you should do it. You know, to anything else, you need more information. Saying someone should be forced to do X is pretty much saying that you should go hold a gun to their head and make them do X whether they like it or not, especially if they don't like it. And pretty much their opinion on it and their own values and, you know, your own contentions on the matter don't matter. Your view doesn't matter. You should be forced to do X. Those are two very different statements. You know, the latter statement is a whole bunch of other conditions that I'm talking about. It's talking about making someone do something. That's incredibly complicated. It immediately suggests like initiation of force or whatever, right? So there's two questions when a game like Hatred comes out. There's two questions whenever anything, any work of art is made that's controversial. Should people be forced to not make things like this? I'll phrase the question like that. Should someone be forced not to create a game like Hatred? Which is basically what Valve did by banning the game from Steam. They basically saying, you should not be allowed to make a game like Hatred. We're banning it from our service. You should be forced not to, a game like Hatred is basically forced not to exist by very practical means against other people's will. The other statement is, should a game like Hatred exist? Or should people make a game like this? Should a game like this be made or not be made? Those are the two sort of, areas of inquiry for this issue that I want to address. But I just want to point out that there's two of them. There's not just this one weird area with should this, that's just like what people are arguing about on the internet. There's the statements, should this be made, should this not be made, versus, it's should this be made versus should this not be made, as well as should someone be forced to make this versus should someone not be forced to make this. Let's start with the second one. Should the developer of the game, I forget their name, but should people be forced not to make a game like Hatred? Or rather, should people be forced not to allow to market a game like Hatred? The answer to this, I'm going to say, is no. Which is, I think in general the free market should decide for an issue like this, an issue of artistic expression. Because if it weren't the free market, you'd get a black market anyway, right? The free market should decide for something on this level, right? Because, let's just point out the practical problems with everything that happened. There's a lot of them. There's actually practical problems for both ends, for both views. Should someone be forced to make this game or not? Should this game be banned or not? There's arguments for either side. The game was greenlit on Steam, which is a service that Valve has for new developers and new games that are being made, where people look at what the developers are doing, look at their work pretty much, and get to upvote whether they like it or not. And this game was upvoted by a significant margin. The problem, and this is something that Total Biscuit, when he did his review, this is something he pointed out. He was saying that the Steam Greenlight thing has a problem, and Valve has had a problem with this thing the entire time. And the problem is pretty obvious. It's not obvious whether or not the Greenlight service accurately presents the wills and desires and wants of the gaming community, right? Because on the Steam Greenlight service, you are only allowed to upvote games. You aren't allowed to downvote games. So if someone was there and they saw Hatred and they didn't like it, they can't do anything about it. The most they can do is move on. And the reason I think it doesn't accurately present the what the community wants is because if you go to YouTube and you look at the game's trailer, it's like 50% upvotes, 50% downvotes. There's one video where there's like two-thirds of the likes are likes and 1/3 is dislikes, and there's another video that has more dislikes than likes. It's pretty obvious, at least if you look at the YouTube stats as like evidence, that there's a lot of contention around this game, that it's about 50-50, let's say. That it's very divisive. You're either going to hate the thing or love it, or hate the thing or be in support of it for whatever reason. And that doesn't. So there's a problem then in the Steam Greenlight thing, because it doesn't represent that divisiveness. Because if this game were divisive and Steam Greenlight took that into account, then it wouldn't greenlight a game that was divisive, right? Because there'd be all the people who didn't want it to go through, right? You would have that problem if you were allowed to downvote things on that. And now, of course, you could maybe say that, well, okay, a lot of the people who dislike the video, the trailer for the game, aren't actually gamers and are just social justice people that found out about it or whatever. But you'd be hard pressed. I think you'd be hard pressed to make that argument. I mean, in the very least, some of the people who like and dislike the video are gamers. And one thing I point out as well, that liking something versus there's a difference between liking and disliking something in terms of a sort of in a measure of conviction. You know, it's easy to like something. You could just be in a good mood that day and just like a video. Why not? You know, if it's something that mildly interested you, you'll like it if you're in a good mood. You know, people like things all the time. Disliking something, though, that takes way more. That takes more conviction. That's a more impassioned response. You know, to dislike a video, you have to just sit there and hate the thing and then dislike it. Which is why all the Molyneux fanboys dislike my Molyneux videos. Anyway, so the fact that these videos have as many dislikes as they do, I think demonstrates that the community, in the very least, the community is not on board with having this game greenlit. And the Greenlight service is supposed to do what the community wants. So if the community wasn't fully on board with it, why did it happen? Because the Steam Greenlight thing wasn't properly set up. So that's an issue that sort of supports Valve's position. However, then there's the issue that everybody else brought up, is that, well, there's other games on Steam, like Hatred, that are arguably worse, or at the very least the same. There's Postal, Postal 2, 3, and Manhunt, and the Manhunt series. And if you don't know what those are, just look them up. They're not... They're basically murder simulators. They're very... I mean, in those games, you are basically the bottom of humanity. That's what you get to behave as. I mean, in Postal, you can you murder people. That's all you do, and you can like piss on their corpse, and it's disgusting, and it's just Squick. It's literally a game that's about Squick. That's all it is. And yet that is still sitting on Steam, whereas this game was banned, and that. Granted, Valve was afraid that the people who made the game Hatred were neo-Nazis, because there was some article on Otaku about not Otaku, Kotaku, Jesus Christ, I can't speak, about this. And, you know, whatever reasons they had for it, it seems hypocritical to ban a game that's, you know, breaking the terms of service or whatever, has offensive content, when they don't ban games that have similar offensive content. You know, games that are basically the same that they don't ban. And granted, Mr. Epsilon and a lot of other people also compared this game to GTA, and that comparison is not good, and I'm going to get to that later. But you can't compare the game to GTA is all I'm going to say on that right now. But yeah, it's a valid point. Why are they allowing games like Postal and Manhunt to be there that are effectively the same thing? This is just a remake of those games in HD. You know, why are they doing this? And of course, the reason is because, you know, there probably wasn't as much uproar about those games, or it wasn't as big a deal. And honestly, there probably was no article about neo-Nazis. I mean, it's hard to grasp why Valve did what they did, but I'm pretty sure that they did it because they were covering their own ass. It's not easy to justify. However, if people are saying that Valve should not be hypocritical, well, and Valve did ban Postal and Manhunt and all the other games that are like Hatred from their service as well, would that have made the situation any better? I don't know. I don't think it would. Honestly, I think people would still be upset, and they would still be arguing that, oh, well, you didn't like the terms of service for the Steam Greenlight thing say nothing about, you know, what games... I mean, they say nothing that would suggest that these games shouldn't be allowed. I mean, they do say something, a little bit, about what these games, about whether these games should be allowed, but I mean, that's up to interpretation. The way, like, there's that clause in the Steam Greenlight terms of service that says something about offensive content, but I don't want to get into that. The point is, people would still be upset, because this is like a very anti-free market kind of decision, and I don't know. It's rightfully so. I think the problem with Valve is that they're not doing what they're doing for moral reasons. They're not doing what they're doing because, well, we disagree with this game on ethical grounds, we don't want it to exist, so we're gonna ban it. In fact, the very fact that they did this gave the game more attention than it deserved to begin with. It turned the game, and this is what Total Biscuit said, and I 100% agree with him, is that it turned the game into a martyr. Now, this game did not deserve to be a martyr. Okay, it's obviously a terrible game. I mean, okay, well, I'll mention my opinion on it later, but it's not a very good game. I don't imagine that it's a game that a lot of people would enjoy, but whether it's great or whether it's terrible doesn't even matter. The very fact that they decided to ban it had the consequence of the opposite effect. It made people very angry at Valve, and it made people want to play this game more. In fact, it made people more aware that this game was a thing. It made people, want to support the studio because they thought the studio was being treated unfairly, and that's another factor, by the way. This studio, if they, they're basically being issued a death sentence if they're not allowed to have their game on Steam. What else can they do? There's nowhere else they can sell their game, right? Other than retail, and that's really expensive. They have a huge problem now just because Valve decided to screw them over like this. So that's a huge issue. You have to consider that. But yeah, you also have to consider the fact that the consequence of this had the opposite effect. If they wanted this game to die out, then they should have just, thrown it into the free market and let it die out. Because that's what would have happened. People would have, inevitably been disinterested in this game. Most people wouldn't have enjoyed it to begin with, and the people who would have, thought it's, ooh, this is cool and edgy, I'll try it, would have probably gotten bored, because honestly it doesn't look very fun, and it doesn't seem to have any complexity, if you ask me. And that's basically the reason why I think Valve should not have done what they did, because it had the opposite effect. If you disagree with the game on moral grounds, then banning it turns it into a martyr, makes people want it more, and then they bring it back, and so the game basically had the best ad campaign you could ever imagine in history. They did what they got what they wanted. People hated the game so much that it became so well known that everybody wanted to get it just to sort of be like, ooh, this game's edgy, or everybody hates this game, I want to see what it's about. That's sort of, that's the mentality that people have. So that's why Valve was wrong. And that's pretty much why I think the free market is the correct, for things in artistic expression, usually, not always, but usually the free market or society, culture, should decide whether or not this is something they want or not. And most often that's the case. Now, I'm not a libertarian, I'm not for the free market in general. In fact, I think sometimes people ought to be coerced for things. Sometimes making people do things against their will is good. Sometimes it's the right thing to do because it has the right effect overall. I just don't think I don't think this was a case like that. You didn't have to force the studio and the market, the community. You didn't have to force the community to not be able to play this game by banning it. They didn't have to do that, and that was the wrong thing to do. And it shows because they brought it back anyway because people got mad at them. And now the game has the best ad campaign in history, and it's gonna sell. So, whether or not the game deserved to be sold, deserved to be made in the first place, it's going to sell because of what Valve did. The other problem with saying that by just banning it's like, since Valve is like a monopoly on this thing, it's very hard. You basically have no power as a developer then. This developer gets screwed over because they made one thing Valve didn't like. What if Valve doesn't like something else? I mean, who knows what Valve would decide to do in the future. If they have this power and they're going to use it, then it's like, it's not that, the community no longer decides what they get to enjoy and what they don't get to enjoy. Valve does. This monopoly does. That's not good, right? So, these obvious arguments for why Valve shouldn't have done this, I agree with them. I agree with what Total Biscuit said. So the second question that I mentioned right at the start, should Valve have banned this game? Should you ban games at all? No. Should you force the community not to enjoy something? No. However, let's move on to the second part. The first question, should this game have existed to begin with? Should the community enjoy this game? Should people make games like this? This issue is more complicated I think. And simply put, my answer to this is no. No, a game like this should not exist. A game like this should not be made. Nobody should enjoy games like this. And for all intents and purposes, in a perfect society, a game like Hatred doesn't exist in a perfect society. It doesn't belong. No, they shouldn't ban it. If someone makes a game like that in today's society. No, Valve should not ban it. No, should you force the community not to enjoy it. But should it be made? No. So the answer to both questions is no. Or rather, if you phrase it in the negation, should this game not? Should the community be forced not to not to experience this game? No. But should the community not experience this game? Yes. So, yeah, let's phrase it like that so the answer to the second question is no. The answer to the first one is yes. Yes, the community should not enjoy this game. Yes, the community should not play this game. Yes, the community should not create games like, whatever. I already told you my opinion. Now I'm going to explain why. Well, it's difficult, but we pretty much have to, before we get into this, we have to sort of agree or decide on what kind of games we actually want. Mr. Repzion, who's a YouTuber that I follow, and he did gaming, he likes gaming, and he did a whole video about this, and he said, that he thought Valve was wrong as well. He also mentioned that this game looks fun, and that he's gonna get it. Now, I'm sort of not taking him seriously on that, because I think that he's suffering from the sort of edginess delusion, where it's like, ooh, this is edgy, I like edgy things because they're edgy and fun, I love edgy things. I think that's his issue. I don't take that mentality seriously. This game does not look fun. Let's be honest with ourselves. It looks, let's ignore the fact that the subject matter is repulsive. The game itself doesn't seem to have enjoyable qualities. It's an isometric shooter, where you shoot people and you have cutscenes when you execute them. There's not much complexity there. I could be wrong, there could be more to it, but this is a very sort of, this isn't a very expensive game. It's not a AAA game. Who knows what mechanics it has, or whether it's actually fun to play or complex or has interesting gameplay. I seriously doubt that it does. And I'm not going to try the game or pick it up for that very reason. It doesn't look fun. Repzion said it looked fun. No, it does not look fun. Literally, forget the themes of the game for a second. Just look at the core mechanics. The core mechanics aren't fun. They look dull and boring at best. We'll get to the themes in a second. So, if the standard for creating art should at the very least be, let's agree that the standard for creating art should at the very least be that games ought to be fun. We want people to create games that are fun. Games that are I think that's a reasonable thing to suggest. We can all agree that a game has to be good. It has to be, at least fun. It has to be at least be enjoyable to play. Forget the theme aspects, just looking at the mechanics, right? And so games that are fun, in the very least, should belong in our utopic moral society. Remember, this is a moral issue. We're talking ethically. Should games that are fun be made? Yes. Should games that are not fun be made? No. Now, sometimes people make games that are that they think are fun, but end up not being fun to begin with. So yeah, Jesus Christ. Sometimes people make games that they think are going to be fun, but people actually hate the games because they're not actually fun. That happens sometimes. Those are called mistakes. But in general, there's the implicit, assumption that every game that's ever made should be fun. Fun enough that it belongs in a perfect utopic society where only fun games are made. So in the very least, that's a criterion. And this game, I doubt is really going to be fun. In fact, the very fact that this game's selling point is its sort of edgy theme probably suggests that it doesn't have much else to offer in terms of fun gameplay. Which means that by that criterion alone, it already fails. It's not a fun game. It's just going for the edgy thematic thing. But then, of course, you could make that, well, maybe this theme belongs in a perfect society. Maybe this theme has value, right? Now, I would suggest that it doesn't. This is sort of where we get into the actual issue, the limits of artistic expression, right? I'm not talking in practicality here. I'm talking about what things should people enjoy? What things should people experience? What things have value and what things don't? If you watch my morality equation video, you know that's sort of how I frame these things. Or in other words, if we were in a perfect ideal society, what belongs in that society and what doesn't? Good people obviously belong in that society. Bad people do not. Good games belong in that society. Bad games not. Good science belongs in, so on and so forth. Now, I'm not suggesting that, I'm not making any claim as to how we get to a perfect society. I'm just saying that in a perfect society, what should be there and what should not be there. And I'm saying hatred should not be there. It should not be there for two reasons. One, it doesn't look fun. But two, and the theme of hatred is repulsive. It's repulsive enough that it ought not be there. Now, you might be thinking that there aren't no limits to artistic expression. You might be thinking that, it doesn't matter. So long as it's art, then it's okay. As long as you're not hurting any person, it's okay. That's usually the opinion that a lot of people take. I think it's pretty naive though, because it's totally naive, because imagine if the game Hatred involved killing children. Now, I know that's some sort of slippery slope argument, but imagine if it did. Now, I don't think that, because, it has killing men and it has killing women. It doesn't have killing children. And I don't think any game would have killing children because, well, yeah, there's just no way that something like that would ever be made, because there would be way more uproar about it than the amount of uproar that Hatred has had. In fact, the developers said that children and animals is where we draw the line. But see, that's sort of, I honestly don't think that children is that big a leap, given from where they are now. Killing men, killing women, we already abort babies, killing children or infants, that's just another step. It's not that much worse if you think about it. Like, morally speaking, it's not that much worse. It seems that much worse because children and babies were sort of conditioned to be incredibly sensitive about about children and babies, because the whole point of evolution is to, whatever, I'm not going to get into that. The point is, in general, it's very monstrous to see children and babies getting hurt. But what if this game had children and babies? Now, I don't think that would be that big a leap. I honestly don't think that that's that much worse than what they already do, but that's not the point. The point is, imagine someone played this game. Imagine, you have a friend, and let's say that they pick this game up, and it has killing babies and killing children, and then let's say he's playing it for hours and hours and hours, and killing the babies and the children, and you know about this because he tells you, and he tells you how much fun it is, and how great it is, and it's really fun, and I feel good when I do this. Would you let this person watch your child? I wouldn't. I would be very disturbed by anyone who honestly enjoyed this game and played it for a long period of time. Because, it's not that this game would cause violence in real life. That's not the argument. The argument is that the kind of mind that would enjoy this thing to begin with is not a very virtuous mind. It's a disturbed mind. Right? I wouldn't trust a person like that. I wouldn't want to be friends with a person. I would probably not associate with a person like that. And because I would not want this, that means that there should be a limit to artistic expression. If anyone were to not want this, there should be a limit to artistic expression. Because we live in a society, and we have to decide as a society what does belong in a utopia and what does not. So where are the limits? Just a general sort of, a general rule of thumb that I have for this sort of stuff is that if you watched my horror games versus horror movies video, all 5 of you who did, you might remember I mentioned in that video that any sort of squick in a game, in a movie, in art, anything, any sort of disturbing subject matter, anything that can be repulsive, killing, murder, all of that stuff, it has to justify itself thematically. You know, it has to justify itself. A game, art, the work cannot just be about the squicky, disgusting repulsiveness, okay? If it has repulsive elements, it has to complement them with non-repulsive elements and have complexity in other areas and have a theme that's not just about the disgustingness in order for the disgusting repulsiveness to make sense within that story, for that disgusting repulsiveness to actually be okay, so to speak. Because if it's just there by itself, then the work is simply disgusting and repulsive and there's nothing else to it. And that's wrong. And that's the rule of thumb that I'm going to use here as well. You know, and yeah, complexity is sort of a big issue. You know, you'd notice that no work of fiction, in art, no art that has complexity is really repulsive. You know, or in the very least, even if it's repulsive and people are repulsed by it, they can still appreciate the complexity of it and the depth of it, despite the repulsiveness. If they're smart and if they notice the complexity, they can still appreciate that even though they're personally repulsed by the work. A good example of that can be something like The Wire, something like Breaking Bad. You know, Game of Thrones, actually a great example. There's so many repulsive things in Game of Thrones, but yet Game of Thrones has so much complexity and depth to it that it doesn't matter. Or, I mean, it matters, but it justifies itself. They're not just doing repulsiveness for repulsiveness' sake, they're doing something with it, right? That's sort of the metric we should use. Repulsiveness for repulsiveness' sake it's bad, right? Now, okay. Let's set up firm limits for what the limits of artistic expression ought to be. Let's actually draw a line in the sand, okay? Now, let's all agree. Let's pick, the average game that has a bit of repulsion, like a horror game. Amnesia. Let's pick Amnesia. Amnesia can be a repulsive game to some people. Totally on board with that. That game is okay. It does not cross the limits of artistic expression. Can we agree on that? I don't think it does, and I'd have a hard time finding a person who did. So let's agree on that. Now let's find something that crosses the limits of artistic expression. Namely, the example I'm going to use for this, that I thought about before making the video, was what I talked about with Josh in that interview a few months ago. There was a woman in New York, some sort of, I forget, for an art project, she got herself pregnant, had an abortion, and then used the fetus parts in the project, in the art project. Now, most people, I imagine, maybe most of you, maybe not, would say that, well, that's fucked up. I would not associate with this person, I would not be friends with them, they clearly lack empathy. I would not want them in my ideal utopic society. They don't belong. They probably are not a very good person, simply based on the fact that they would do something like this. Now that is crossing the limits of artistic expression. For obvious reasons. Maybe some of you disagree, I don't know, but I think that doing something like aborting your own, getting pregnant just to abort the fetus, just to cut it up and use it in your own art project is so fucked up that it's obvious. It should be obvious that that is crossing the line, right? I imagine most of us can agree that that's crossing the line. Arguing that that's not crossing the line is very difficult to defend. I'm not going to address that argument. But let's assume for a second that this is crossing the line. So then at the top limit we have Amnesia, and everything, that's less repulsive than Amnesia is okay. And then down here we have, using your fetus in an art project, and everything down below it is obviously not okay. So then hatred is somewhere in the middle, right? Hatred is somewhere in the middle. And the question is, should this sort of range be sort of confined? Are there things more repulsive than Amnesia that deserve that are sort of not past the line, and at what point do we definitively cross it? Now, obviously it's not easy to draw a line in the sand completely. The best we can do is sort of make this range shorter and shorter and smaller, but we can't make it just a firm line completely. It's still going to have some finite thickness. At least that's what I think. And my interpretation of this comes down to two things: complexity and theme, or thematic complexity. There's a thematic problem with a work of art if the only thing it's about is squick. If the only point of it is to be repulsive. If a game is like Hatred, now the theme of Hatred is inarguably murdering people, and it's Murder Simulator, and Manhunt and Postal and all, it's the same. That's the only theme it has. Those are the only themes that those games have. It's just about killing and doing horrible things. That theme is a bad theme. It is intrinsically bad, okay? For obvious reasons. There is no reason to enjoy a theme like this. I imagine very few people would actually enjoy a work of art whose only theme is that. That is not the kind of subject matter that is enjoyable. It is repulsive. To people who are more sensitive about it, it could be more repulsive. But the fact is, there's nothing to be gained from a theme like that. Right? Now, I already said, repulsiveness needs to justify itself by having complexity in other areas. Now, something a lot of people might say about a game like Postal is that it's sarcastic, right? It's satirical. You could make this claim, but honestly, I think that any work of art that is about squick often uses the sort of satire, sarcasm excuse to justify why it's so repulsive. Real satire is, it's incredibly complex. It's not something. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if these games were in fact about satire, that would be apparent, or in the very least, you would be suspicious. It wouldn't be this overwhelming barrage of violence and killing and nothing else, right? In fact, the developers for Hatred, I think they said that it was not in fact satire, that it was in fact just a barrage of killing and awfulness and nonsense, right? So just saying, well, it's satire isn't enough. You have to sort of justify that. That isn't enough complexity just by itself. Maybe it is in fact satirical, but more work would have to be done in doing that. I can't think of a good sort of work of satire off the top of my head. There's a movie called a Serbian film that came out in like 2010, which is a horrible movie, and a lot of people might say, oh, this movie's great because it's just like satire, but it's not. I would not. It's very hard to justify that all of that movie is entirely just satire. It is easier and a lot more probable to say that no, this movie is simply glorifying violence and horrible things. It's not saying you should do them, obviously not. I'm not suggesting that. Well, actually, it would be saying that implicitly, but the theme of it is squick and horrible things, right? And so satire I'm saying satire isn't enough. Usually, when a work is very violent or when a work is very horrible, and this is sort of what horror movies are, the only way it justifies itself is if it has a psychological element to it or a philosophical element to it. And this isn't easy to get across, and most horror movies fail, and this is why in that video I say a lot of horror movies are very bad. Some horror games do it well. Outlast, I think, is a great example. This is a game that is incredibly violent, incredibly full of squick, incredibly disgusting and repulsive. However, it has a lot of interesting elements to it. It has very interesting mechanics, it has very interesting storytelling. It actually has an interesting message I would say that it has an interesting message to it as well. And, all these other elements combined with the repulsiveness justify the repulsiveness. They make this seem less bad, or in the very least, they make this acceptable. They make this they make this understandable, because then you're like, oh, but they would have to have this stuff here to, they would have to have this element here in order for these three other elements to make sense and to work. And that's sort of the approach that you need to have when you're doing art that is repulsive, is that, the repulsiveness needs to add to something that isn't repulsive. It cannot just be there for its own sake. Repulsiveness for its own sake is evil, is what I'm trying to say. Repulsiveness for its own sake is not very good. And a lot of people compare this game to GTA, and this is actually the reason why this game is completely different from GTA. GTA is not about killing people. It is not, honestly, GTA isn't even about murder. It's about, more than anything, it's about stealing cars and riding cars and crashing in other cars. It's Grand Theft Auto. The entire game, the entire game series has always been about vehicles. And it's not like you're really supposed to go around town just killing people. You could do this, but there's penalties, and eventually you're going to have 5 stars, and the cops are going to be trying to kill you. You're not going to be able to just go around doing this. Whereas a game like Hatred, its entire design is to glorify the murder of individuals, and the same with Manhunt, and the same with Postal. That's all it's about. That's the only thing it's supposed to be about. Sure, there's cops that are going to fight you in Hatred, but there's a difference. There's the little subtle things. The very fact that you have a cutscene for executions, the way these executions work, the motivations of the main character, the freedoms that the game allows you to do, the fact that murdering innocent people, there's nothing else for you to do other than that's the only element they have to offer. All of these little things add up, and they suggest to me that the theme of this game is solely, murder. That is the theme of this game. The theme of GTA is not murder. GTA has many, many other elements. It's like, it's different. It's different. It's different. Okay. For instance, GTA has a torture scene in it. GTA 5. It has a torture scene in it. Now, it doesn't just do that for its own sake. It does something with that torture scene. It uses it to tell a story. Now, imagine a game that was just a torture simulator. It's not the same, right? It's not the same. A torture simulator, its only theme is torture and pain and violence. GTA doesn't glorify these things. It uses them to tell a story. All right, and it has so many other elements. Again, like I mentioned, vehicles, missions, actual politics, and there's actual characters in there. There's a story behind it all, and honestly, if I knew someone who only played GTA to murder people and that's all they ever did, I would be concerned for them. They would seem very disturbed to me. It's disturbing that someone can play a game like GTA and do nothing but murder people and ignore all the other elements that this game has to offer, that a game like GTA 5 has to offer. So I don't think Mr. Repzion is correct when he compares it to GTA 5. I don't think that the people in the comments section on that video were correct when they compared it to GTA 5, when they said, well, yeah, GTA 5 is also just about murdering civilians. It's not. You're an idiot if you think that that's what it's about. Like, you actually are a complete idiot. If you look at a game as complex and deep, and like, you can play the stock market in GTA. You have a crib, you can upgrade your house. It's like GTA 5 is honestly like living, it's like a real life simulator more than anything. It's not that realistic, but it's like a real life simulator. That's what they were trying to go for. They're trying to add in all these elements that you would get in real life as well, like the stock market, like your a phone, like all these little missions and things you can do. Well, that's not like real life, but like the bank and clothes shops and clothes stores and all these different forms of customization that you get in a game like that. Those other elements don't glorify murder. Those other elements aren't about the killing of innocent people in GTA 5. That's not what they're there for. They're there for their own sake. Because the point of that game is all of these little elements in a video game that are elements you have in real life. That's what the point of the game like GTA 5 is. They give you a city, and they give you a lot of real-life elements in this game, and they let you sort of go around this sandbox and have fun. Sure, every once in a while you might say, oh, I'm just mad, I'll murder some random civilians. I usually don't do that. I will occasionally, but that's different than having the entire game centered around just that. And people who think that GTA 5 is centered around that, or would even suggest that that's what GTA 5 is centered around, are stupid. They are completely inane, insane, and retarded. Okay? And I have I have almost no, I mean, sure, maybe they don't understand themes, but that is an indefensible position. And I would never, ever agree to that argument that this is exactly what GTA 5 is about. It is an insult to GTA 5 to suggest that it is like this wretched, disgusting, empty, vacuous, nil piece of crap of a game whose only point is for you to do horrible things to NPCs. Whereas GTA 5, that has so much creativity, so much depth, so much more to offer than just that, and you're gonna say, oh, well, that just doesn't matter. You're an idiot if that's what you think. And that's an example of the very problem I'm talking about, of thematic complexity. There's no thematic complexity in a game like Hatred. That's why it doesn't justify itself. GTA 5 has a ton of thematic complexity, which is why all of the violence that GTA 5 allows, all of the violence that GTA 5 has, justifies itself. All of the squick that it has justifies itself, and that is why it is still a good game, and that is why it is well above Amnesia, and well within the acceptable range, and nowhere close to the limit of artistic expression. You know, you don't have to just kill and murder people in GTA 5. When you load up the game, you can go through the game without killing or murdering innocent people at all. You can do anything else that you want. You can be a pacifist. You can be, I mean, you might have to rob a store every once in a while and you will have to do crime, but you'd have to commit crimes, but it's not just committing crimes is all you're going to do and murdering innocent people is all you're going to do. Hell, committing crimes is still better than murdering innocent people. Because nobody in real life just wants to murder innocent people. I mean, except like those psychopaths that shoot up a bunch of schools, you know, but that's a rare case. And that's not the kind of person you're supposed to be when you play GTA 5. That is not the kind of, that's not what the player character is. There's so much else. Whereas the only thing to do in Hatred and Postal and those other games is to be a murderer, to be a mass murderer. That's all there is there. That's a thematic difference. And I would say that it's the thematic element of the game that basically tells you whether it's past the line of past the limits of artistic expression or not. You know, if your work of art is thematically simple, and if your work of art thematically is something repulsive, and if your work is thematically something immoral, like murder, like torture, like squick, anything, you know, anything evil, anything horrible, anything squicky, anything repulsive, if that's the theme of your work, if that's what your work of art is about, then that is past the line, past the limits of artistic expression. If it is not, if it's using squick and it's using murder and it's using violence and all these repulsive elements to do something with them, to tell a story, to appeal to some idea, to make a point, then that's different. Then that is not crossing the line. And that's basically how it should stand. So that is why games like this should never be made. Games like this should not be enjoyed. And the community should not enjoy a game like this. The community should not play a game like this. Games like this should never be bought, never be sold, basically never marketed, never made, they shouldn't exist. That's what it comes down to. They should not, this is a game that should not exist. It doesn't have enough value to exist. And so in my utopic perfect society that you get when you apply the morality equation, this game does not exist. And I imagine that for most people, that would probably be the case. That this is not the kind of game that they think should exist. There's better things is essentially what it comes down to. You know, there's better things to do. There's better things to enjoy. You can do better is what I would say to the community. The community can do better. You know, even the people that enjoy this game could enjoy this. Even the people that enjoy the subject matter of this game could do better. Every one of us could do better. This game doesn't do better. It's just repulsive. You know, Total Biscuit, I'll just end on this final note. In his video, Total Biscuit said that, yeah, you know, games can make us do repulsive things, but that's sort of the point. You know, games are allowed to make you feel bad about what you do. Yeah, but there's a difference between a game like GTA making you feel bad for torturing a guy and a game like Hatred that is all about torturing and all about murder and all about doing terrible things. There's a difference. You know, this is a game that is trying to make you feel bad to make a point, to tell a story, and this is a game that is trying to make you feel bad simply to make you feel bad. There's a difference. And that's what I leave you with. So let me know if you agree or disagree. And if you have updates, if you have modifications or improvements to the limits of artistic expression that you want to suggest, then by all means let me know. Cheers.